Welcome to the Life Unlimited podcast with Larry Heller. You deserve complete financial advice so you can confidently live your life your way, for life. Now, let's get into this week's podcast episode.
Hello and welcome to Life Unlimited with Larry Heller of Heller Wealth Management. Larry, how are you?
I'm doing terrific, Eric. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. It's good to be back with you. I hear we're talking about kind of a serious topic today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about divorce and retirement.
Divorce and retirement at the same time?
Kind of some of the things you have to do if you're getting divorced later in life and what that means, how can that affect your retirement, what you can do about it. So yeah, that is something that's important.
Yeah, well, from my thought process, and obviously you're the pro, and that's why we're doing this, I look at it as like it's going to kind of double everything that you have to purchase, right? Because now you're going to need double the vehicles, maybe, depending on how many vehicles you originally had. You have to have two places to live. And so that cuts the retirement kind of in half. Is that what you see?
Yeah, it could, depending, and also can make you have to work longer. And so getting divorced later in life can do that. Of course, you may have more enough assets for both to be able to do that. But how does your retirement going to look after divorce? So, and also some of the steps you can do when you're looking at this, when you're even negotiating or going through the divorce process. But so we're going to talk a little bit about all the different items that you need to be concerned about. Some, obviously, even if you aren't getting divorced later in life, younger life, you still need to address that. But we're gonna address some of the topics that are also better or more important as you get closer to that retirement age.
Okay, and so what is that term? Silver separation?
Well, no, I think that the term is really gray divorce.
Gray divorce. Okay.
I haven't heard silver separation. I like that one.
Okay.
So that could be a new one, silver separation.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just term that. I have a couple others in my mind. I'm not going to say out loud just in case we get in trouble. I don't want to get fired. So, all right. So where do we start today?
So, well, the first thing is what we've found for most couples, that whether you're, getting divorced or not, that one spouse for the most part is the financial spouse, and the other one is not. Not to say that both spouses don't have some financial acumen, but one really takes more control over the investments and some of the situations. So depending upon if you're the financial spouse or the non-financial spouse, could mean whether you need some more help in going through all these items, especially some of the non-financial spouse. Now, I'm not going to say that non-financial spouse means the female in that case, because we've have a few stay-at-home dads that we have as clients, and they're the non-financial spouses. So so it works both ways. So it really is the non-financial spouse just needs to get themselves educated a little bit more on some of the things that are going on and be more involved in really figuring out how that's going to impact their retirement.
Are you saying, when you say non-financial, are you leaning more toward somebody that hasn't worked outside of the home as much as the other, or are we talking about somebody who hasn't been involved in the investments, finances, and things like that?
Right. Now, I'm not talking about working. I'm talking about the person who hasn't been involved in the investments, the finances, some of the decisions that have to be made. So one kind of takes the lead on that. But both could be working. Correct.
Yeah, got it. All right. And that's how it is in my family. I mean, quite honestly, and I think that's most families. One person's usually a little bit better at it. My wife does all the online bill paying and all that stuff. Now we have our passwords and things. I mean, we've talked about this on this show before, making sure that you have security and making sure that both spouses know where the passwords are in case something were to happen. But in this situation, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, is that you got to get somebody up to speed. Because if I had to do everything on my own, heaven forbid, my wife left me, or left me, whether by death or by whatever, it would definitely be something. It'd be a learning curve for me.
Yeah. Some couples, they don't work with a financial planner or a financial advisor. So one person has kind of mapped out their budget, their retirement plan, their cash flow, and it's kind of left it up to them. The other one is doing other things that are important that make a marriage work. So they may not know anything about that. So So now, what do you do about that? And what are the steps that you need to take? So we're not going to just talk about all the things we've talked about. Some of this on our previous podcasts about divorce, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the financials and how that affects the retirement and some of the things you need to talk about with that.
All right. Well, teach me. I'm ready.
Okay, let's start with the first one. And you kind of mentioned something a little bit before this, that there are double costs. Well, the biggest double cost that is going to be your housing costs. Now you're in one place, one housing cost. Now there's going to be two. So what does that mean? What can you afford? Are you going to be able to afford the same type of house and the expenses now when there is only one income, or one of you left, or half the assets left after a divorce, or you're going to need to downsize and go to something else? So really the first thing is trying to figure out what those housing costs are going to be, and also where to live. I mean, there are some non-financial issues as you're closing in retirement. Are you going to want to stay where you are now? You're going to want to move to a different location, to a different state? Are you going to want to stay someplace now, but then retire somewhere else? So trying to figure those out and trying to figure out what those costs are, because the housing costs are a significant part, is going to have a major impact on the retirement plan.
Yeah. I can imagine there's a pretty emotional toll when it comes to the housing piece of it, when you're talking about maybe kids and grandkids specifically, right? Because if kids are thinking that mom and dad are going to keep the house they grew up in forever, and they're always going to be able to go back and visit on Thanksgiving and stuff like that, well, one spouse probably can't handle that house, or it's very large and it's just too much, or it's going to be too expensive.
Yeah, and also one may be able to handle it, but because the cost of the house has gone
Yeah.
probably up so much over the years, in order to do a settlement, they need to sell the house
Yeah.
to split the assets. So it may not even be an option, even if one wanted to stay in the house. So obviously it depends. Do you have grown-up children? Do you have children still in school that are going to want to stay there for a while, and therefore you're going to have certain housing costs now and then different housing costs afterwards? But you're right. There's also the emotional impact too, and that takes sometimes a little getting over. I can speak from personal experience. So the house and where you're going to go and what you're going to do definitely has a major impact.
What about investments when it comes to, because really the title of this is Divorce After 50, right? So that's another 15 years of working, maybe 12 years of working. What about investments when it comes to like 401ks and things that are tied to people's jobs? How does that work?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, every divorce is different, and how it gets split and how it does. But yeah, if you're splitting everything 50-50, now you've just cut your investments in half, and your expenses may not go down in half because you have some shared expenses. So yeah, looking into that, figuring that out, and then really getting a handle on your investments and what is the right investment mix, what is the right asset allocation, what are the investments that you're left with, what are the cost basis in these investments that you're left with when it comes to divorce. Deciding, there are sometimes we've seen in certain instances you're splitting assets and they may be the same dollar amount, but one has a lower cost basis. So what that means is when you go to sell it, you're going to pay more in taxes. So you want to be cognizant about that. So yeah, knowing the investments and knowing which investments and how to split that up, and of course, obviously, a lot of matrimonial attorneys will be tuned in on that and be able to help you
Well,
with
I
that.
kind of sidetracked this a little bit because that was just on my brain, the whole investment in 401k, working part of it. And I'm sure we'll talk about income here in a little bit too. But when it comes to living expenses, what else do we really need to know? I mean, we've already talked about it's kind of doubling it a bit, but what else?
Yeah, again, it may be doubling it, but just really figuring out what your expenses are going to be, because yeah, jumping ahead of your income, now you got to combine a lot of different things. So, and are you the spouse that's receiving income? So if you're receiving income, now you're getting some type of spousal payment. So you're getting some income. Are you working and you're getting some income from there? But now, what are your expenses? So are you going to be able to save money in the next 15 or maybe not? So you really need to get a handle on what you're going to be doing. On the flip side, if you're the spouse that's paying spousal support, now you have an additional expense on top of your living expenses. And now you may have the only income that's coming through. So again, here you really want to know what your expenses are, what your income is going to be to see how much you're going to save. And that'll give you an idea are you on track for retirement? So knowing your housing expenses, knowing your living expenses, knowing what your income is, and again, for the non-financial spouses, could be all brand new to them. So those are all steps that is going to be critical to figure out not only now, but then in retirement. So you know how long your money will last and how much you have to save. What is that pot of money? We were working with a client, and it was a contentious divorce, and he just wanted to get it settled. So we ran numbers for him, and based upon what his soon-to-be ex-wife was asking, and he didn't want to go to litigation. He didn't want to go to court. So he said, well, if it works and I can still retire a couple years after I planned on doing, I'd rather give in and just get it done and be done with it rather than go to court. So when we were able to run the numbers for him, he says, you know what? I can live with this. It's not the same thing, but it's still going to work for me. And boom. But we had to have good numbers. You had to have good expense numbers. You had to have good income numbers to really rely on that to see if the retirement plan is going to work.
So let me ask you this. Is there a different type of tax burden that someone will face if they are, whether they're making spousal payments or receiving spousal payments? I know we're going to talk about taxes in a minute. I suppose that, I can only assume that they're going to be in a higher tax bracket because now they're single, right? I mean, they're not married, so it's going to be a single tax bracket, which is completely different. But what about in regards to spousal payments?
Yeah, so spousal payments. So the federal law changed 2 years ago. So spousal payments are no longer taxable income for the spouse receiving them, and for the spouse paying them, they no longer get a deduction. Federal wise, state wise, that could be different. New York State still recognizes it as income and as a deduction. So you know the rules along those lines. But you're right about the single tax pay. Now both spouses were working, and now they're earning less. Yes, maybe they're in a higher tax bracket because they don't get the advantage of the marriage tax rate. So yeah, you want to know what your taxes are going to be.
Yeah. That really changes everything, right? I mean, obviously your life changes, but
yeah, I was going to say the divorce kind of changes everything, but yes. So this could change, change everything, short of being, Bill Gates or and that type of wealth income that's not going to change anything, or Bezos and those divorces. Yeah, but for the average person, yeah, it's going to change. It's going to change things, and you want to prepare it. You want to be able to game plan for it. So you want to figure out, do I have to work a little bit longer? Do I have to live somewhere else? Do I have to reduce my expenses, or am I going to be able to maintain my same lifestyle for both spouses? And knowing those things make it a little bit easier if you can do that and know it from a financial standpoint.
You talked about investments earlier when I asked you about 401ks and different things like that. But I know that there is cost basis. I think you even mentioned that in the investment part of it. But what about like collectibles? Because when you start to divorce and you have to split everything, what if there's a collection involved? Does some of that need to be sold as far as value wise?
Well, it doesn't have to be sold. It could be, one could get one, another spouse can get the other, whether it's of equal value or not, or just enjoyment value. So everything is up for negotiations, and everything is up for discussion. But everything should be put into your agreement, so there's no misunderstandings. Whether it's a collectible, Of course, now things could get a little bit more complicated by cryptocurrency,
Oh, geez, I didn't even
by
think about that.
yeah. So you got cryptocurrency now. You've got these I forget what it's called. There's something else that's called
NFTs,
NFTs.
those
Thank
things.
you, Eric.
I don't even know what those things
Exact,
are. They're pictures. That's all I
exactly.
know, Larry.
So you have that, and then you have even valuations. So how do you value a business? How do you value a property? Do you have to get appraisals for all them? So yes, so going through all that and figuring all those things out is usually done, and during the divorce side.
And I'm assuming that property is going to be very similar with capital gains issues, if they have a
Yep.
vacation property or whatever.
Absolutely. So it gets complicated from both just the separation and from a tax standpoint. So you want to have somebody working together. Again, there is some matrimonial attorneys that will suggest they hire us because it gets real complicated on the tax side. Some matrimonial attorneys end up doing it themselves and trying to figure out what's right. Others hire forensic specialists. So really depends upon how complicated and what the size of the net worth is to determine the best solution for each party.
All right. I want to fast forward a little bit, but before I do, is there anything else that we need to know about taxes or investments in this situation?
No, nothing about taxes. I'll kind of step ahead and and talk about something else, and that's Social Security.
That's
And
exactly where I wanted to fast forward to. Yeah.
Yeah, and how that works, and what do you get for Social Security? So if you married 10 years, you're eligible for your ex-spouse's Social Security. You don't have to worry about where that person is or what they're making and tracking them down. The government will know that. So determining what the Social Security is, whether you take your own, whether you take your ex-spouse's, when to take that, can have also an impact on how that works for your retirement.
Okay. So you've covered Social Security before. You've covered it multiple times on different podcasts beautifully. Really did a deep dive. And from my memory, if a spouse dies and you're still married, you can take theirs if it's more than yours, right?
Correct.
So in a divorce situation, you're married more than 10 years, your spouse dies, you still can collect theirs, correct?
Correct. Whether they
Okay.
die, whether they don't die, you still can collect theirs if you're married more than 10 years.
What if they
So
remarried, Larry?
doesn't make so if you remarry, if they remarry, it doesn't make a difference. If your ex-spouse remarries, it doesn't make a difference. If you remarry, it could make a difference. So if you're remarried before 60, it would make a difference. After 60, you can use it either or. So there are different rules that you want to know about.
Yeah.
So if you're divorced and you're 59 and a half thinking about getting married and your ex-spouse has got a much bigger Social Security than your future spouse, you may want to delay that a little bit.
Okay. That's the romantic stuff, isn't it? Okay.
Second
So
time around, maybe the financial numbers come in a little bit differently.
yeah.
So, and there are other different strategies. And again, check out our Social Security podcast for listening more about it. But really knowing the Social Security and what the rules are definitely has an impact on your retirement plan.
Yeah. And you mentioned, did you say a matrimonial attorney? Is that how you phrased it?
Yes, divorce attorney, matrimonial attorney, maybe a little bit nicer phrasing
Okay.
phrasing of that. So that's how I phrased. Yes.
So when you have somebody like that, they're going to help you negotiate cash flow. They're going to help you negotiate what that looks like, right? I mean, because they have to have the entire picture.
Well, yeah, well, they're going to go by what the rules are in that state and what if you're receiving or you're going to be paying spousal support. So there's the law of the state. It's not what is going to work for the cash flow retirement. It's what's going to work for what is the law is going to be. And then even if it's not the laws, what both spouses are going to be comfortable with. And that's why some get settled easier. Others go into litigation in order to get settled. So it's not just really what the cash flow is. The attorneys will kind of look and how do you split up the assets? How do you split up the income streams? And good attorneys will want to obviously protect yourself to make sure that you're getting what you're entitled to either way, from a cash flow standpoint. But they're not going to look at, well, how does that impact this person's retirement? That's that they're not really looking at. They may question it, but that's when we come in and able to do some retirement projections. And having, like I said before, like in the example I said before, knowing either during negotiations of the retirement, that would be great. A lot of times we don't get called in to do some of that analysis until it's been finalized. So now it's been finalized. Now we start running the numbers and saying, okay, this is what it is. Now, how are we going to put a game plan together? How are we going to make this retirement plan work for you? We'll run all the cash flow numbers. We'll know what the tax ramifications are. We'll know what the spousal payments are. We'll know what everything gets split, and we'll figure all those things out.
Okay. Well, I can't think of any more questions that I personally have, Larry, but what other information does the audience need to know?
Yeah, so we've prepared a little report on the 10 critical steps to take after getting divorced. And you can go into our website. There'll be a little link on the bottom here where you can go right into our website and download that report, and it'll cover some of these and a few others. And of course, if they want to reach out to us and contact us, they can go to our website, hellowealthmanagement.com, or feel free to give the office 631-248-3600 a call, and we can schedule a time to speak.
All right. Larry, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. This is not the most fun topic, but really, really important, because last I heard the divorce rate is pretty high still.
Absolutely. And the divorce rate for over 50 is even higher.
Oh,
Yeah, it's growing. It's going. It's the largest area of divorce is over 50. Yes. So unfortunately, that's happening, and you want to be prepared for it.
yeah, absolutely. Again, Larry, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Eric. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah. And our last thank you goes to you, listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Life Unlimited podcast with Larry Heller. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Larry comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And this makes it really easy to share this with your friends and family. And if you've got somebody who you think is going through this or may go through this is a great podcast to give them, because they need to know this information. You don't want to go into something like this unequipped, and Larry and his team can definitely help. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Hello Wealth Management, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.